Hello. So we are going to read Ivanhoe Chapter 2. I hope that's okay, right? Every time I read from these books, I start wondering if um, they have a copyright over it or not. But I think it should be okay because it was uh, published in 1800s, right? When was it published? Mm, it was published before 1832 because I remember that was when Sir Walter Scott died. No, I don't know. I don't know. Between 1816 and 1832, because 1816 was when Sir Walter Scott published his first novel, which is written here. I don't know where it is. Waverley. No, 1814. Okay, let's start. I'm going to read 2 chapters this time, I think, because I need to finish this book before this month ends. Alright, Chapter 2, Ivanhoe, Sir Walter Scott. A monk there was, a fire for the maestry, an outsider they loved venerate, a manly man to be an abbot able. Full many a dainty horse had he in stable, and when he rode, men might his bridle hear. Gingerling in the whistling wind is clear, and eke is loud as doth the chapel bell. There as this lord was keeper of the cell. Chaucer. Chaucer wrote this. So, a little bit of my comments here. So this is written about a knight, and Sir Walter Scott is supposed to be that person with whom the tradition of, I guess, historical romance often talks about knights, right? Let me check. Historical romance. Yes. Not that historical romance. Knight or knights. They're giving the contemporary type of historical romance. Contemporary historical romance genre here, which is very, very different. Yes, in English literature, perfect. No, historical novel. This is going in a very different direction. Yes, historical romance in literature. No, no, no. I'm so disappointed. So disappointed. So disappointed. Because all I hear about in at this place is the contemporary historical romance. That is not what we're talking about. Technically, it's historical novel. That is what they're saying here. But I've also heard the phrase historical romance. So basically, they write about knights, and think, what about knights? Um, Saving people, I guess. I don't know. I'm still reading, but yeah, Chaucer reminds me of that because Chaucer has the knight as its first character. That was what I was talking about. I went really astray. But yeah, also it's raining. I hope I hope you're able to hear the good sound and not the other background noise that sound a little creepy. Yeah. But here Rosa is talking about a monk. What could that mean? Alright, let's start again. Notwithstanding the occasional exhortation and chiding of his companion, the noise of the horsemen's feet continuing to approach Wamba, could not be prevented from lingering occasionally on the road. Upon every pretence which occurred, now catching from the hazel a cluster of half-ripe nuts, and now turning his head to leer after a cottage maiden who crossed their path. The horsemen, therefore, soon overtook them on the road. Their numbers amounted to 10 men, of whom the two who rode foremost seemed to be persons of considerable importance, and others their attendants. It was not difficult to ascertain the condition and character of one of these personages. He was obviously an ecclesiastic of high rank. His dress was that of a Cistercian Cistercian monk, but composed of materials much finer than those which the rule of that order admitted. His mantle and hood were of the best Flanders cloth, and fell in ample and not ungraceful folds around a handsome though somewhat corpulent person. His countenance bore as little the marks of self-denial as his habit indicated contempt of worldly splendour. His features might have been called good, had there not lurked under the penthouse of his eye that sly Epicurean twinkle which indicates the cautious vulpituary. So let me continue. The other respects his profession In other respects, his profession and situation had taught him a ready command over his countenance, which he could contract at pleasure into solemnity, although its natural expression was that of a good-humoured social indulgence. In defiance of conventual rules, and the edicts of popes and councils. The sleeves of this dignitary were lined and turned up with rich furs, his mantle secured at the throat with a golden clasp, and the whole dress proper to his order as much refined upon and ornamented as that of a Quaker beauty of the present day, who, while she retains the garb and costume of her sect, continues to give to its simplicity, by the choice of materials and the mode of disposing them, a certain air of coquettish attraction savouring, but too much of the vanities of the world. So I have a thought. This hasn't happened to me in quite a while when I read something, even if it is classic literature, that I am unable to understand certain words, much less pronounce them. And it's very interesting. It's very challenging. I like it, but I'm also not able to read as smoothly, and I wondered why that's happening. Because if I were to read any other book, it wouldn't be so. But it is with this book, and I really like that. I really like that because I love the written word. Basically, I love interesting words that I have never heard. I love words that I can use in my vocabulary, and no one's gonna know what it means. I mean, I won't know it too after a while because it's not used as frequently in our everyday vocabulary, I guess. And that is why I will forget it too, but it would be so much fun. Yeah, let's continue. This worthy churchman rode upon a well-fed ambling mule, whose furniture was highly decorated, and whose bridle, according to the fashion of the day, was ornamented with silver bells. In his seat he had nothing of the awkwardness of the convent, but displayed the easy and habitual grace of a well-trained horseman. Indeed, it seemed that so humble a conveyance as a mule, in however good case, and however well broken to a pleasant and accommodating amble, was only used by the gallant monk for travelling on road. A lay brother, one of those who followed in the train, had, for his use on other occasions, one of the most handsome Spanish jennets ever bred at Andalusia, which merchants used at that time to import with great trouble and risk for the use of persons of wealth and distinctions. The saddle and housing of this superb palfrey were covered by a long footcloth, which reached nearly to the ground, and on which were richly embroidered mitres, crosses, and other ecclesiastical emblems. Another lay brother led a sumpter mule. Another lay brother led a sumpter mule, loaded probably with his superior's baggage, and two monks of his own order, of inferior station, rode together in the rear, laughing and conversing with each other, without taking much notice of the other members of the cavalcade. Cavalcade. The companion of the church dignitary was a man past 40, thin, strong, tall, and muscular, an athletic figure which long fatigue and constant exercise seemed to have left none of the softer parts of the human form, having reduced the whole to brawn and bones and sinews, which had sustained 1,000 toils, and were ready to dare 1,000 more. His head was covered with a scarlet cap, faced with fur of that kind which the French call mortier, from its resemblance to the shape of an inverted mortar. Mortar. His countenance was therefore fully displayed, and its expression was calculated to impress a degree of awe, if not fear, upon strangers. High features, naturally strong and powerfully expressive, had been burnt almost into negro blackness by constant exposure to the tropical sun. Might, in their ordinary sense, be said to slumber after the storm of passion had passed away. But the projection of the veins of the forehead, the readiness with which the upper lip and its thick black moustaches quivered upon the slightest emotion, painfully intimate that the tempest might be again and easily awakened. His keen, piercing, dark eyes told in every glance a history of difficulties subdued, and dangers dared, and seemed to challenge opposition to his wishes, for the pleasure of sweeping it from his road by a determined exertion of courage and of will. A deep scar on his brow gave additional sternness to his countenance, and a sinister expression to one of his eyes, which had been slightly injured on the same occasion, and of which the vision, though perfect, was in slight and partial degree distorted. I must say, I am bad at pronouncing words. I'm sorry. I'm still going to read it all, and you're going to listen to it. The upper dress of this personage resembled that of his companion in shape, being a long monastic mantle, but the colour, being scarlet, showed that he did not belong to any of the four regular orders of the monks. On the right shoulder of the mantle there was a cut in white cloth, a cross of a peculiar form. This upper robe concealed what at first seemed rather inconsistent with its form, a shirt, namely, of linked mail, with sleeves and gloves of the same, curiously plaited and interwoven, as flexible to the body as those which are now wrought in stocking loom, out of less obdurate material. The forepart of his thighs, where the folds of his mantle permitted them to be seen, were also covered with linked mail. The knees and feet were defended by splints or thin plates of steel, ingeniously jointed upon each other, and mail hoops, reaching from the ankle to the knee, effectually protected the legs, and completed the rider's defensive armor. In his girdle he wore a long and double-edged dagger, which was the only offensive weapon about his person. He rode not a mule, like his companion, but a strong hackney for the road, to save his gallant war horse, which a squire led behind, fully accoutred for battle. That was my alarm to drink water. He rode, not a mule like his companion, but a strong hackney for the road to save his gallant war horse, which a squire led behind fully accoutred for battle, with a chamfron or plated headpiece upon his head, having a short spike projected from the front. On one side of the saddle hung a short battle-axe, richly inlaid with damascene carving. I hope that's the correct pronunciation. On the other, the rider's plumed headpiece and hood of mail, with a long two-handed sword, used by the chivalry of the period. A second squire held aloft his master's lance, from the extremity of which fluttered a small banderole, or streamer, bearing a cross of the same form with that embroidered upon his cloak. He also carried his small triangular shield, broad enough at the top to protect the breast, and from thence diminishing to a point. It was covered with scarlet cloth, which prevented the device from being seen. These two squires were followed by two attendants, whose dark visages, white turbans, and the oriental form of their garments showed them to be natives of some distant eastern country. The whole appearance of this warrior and his retinue was wild and outlandish. The dress of his squires was gorgeous, and his eastern attendants wore silver collars round their throats. Could be necklaces, and bracelets of the same metal upon their swami arms and legs, of which the former were naked from the elbow, and the latter from mid-leg to ankle. Silk and embroidery distinguished their dresses, and marked the wealth and importance of their master, forming at the same time a striking contrast with martial simplicity of his own attire. They were armed with crooked sabres, having the hilt and baldric inlaid with gold and matched with Turkish daggers of yet more costly workmanship. Each of them bore, at his saddle bow, a bundle of darts or javelins, about 4 feet in length, having sharp steel heads, a weapon much in use among the Saracens, and of which the memory is yet preserved in martial exercise called El Jerid, still practiced in the eastern countries. The steeds of these attendants were in appearance as foreign as their riders. They were of Saracen origin and consequently of Arabian descent, and their fine slender limbs, small fetlocks, thin manes, and easy springy motion formed a marked contrast with the large-jointed heavy horses, of which the race was cultivated in Flanders and in Normandy, for mounting the men-at-arms of the period in all the panoply of plate and mail, and which, placed by the side of those eastern coursers, might have passed for personification of substance and of shadow. The singular appearance of this cavalcade not only attracted the curiosity of Wamba, but excited even that of his less volatile companion. The monk he instantly knew to be the prior of Jorvaux Abbey, well known for many miles around as lover of chase, of the banquet, and if fame did him not wrong, of otherworldly pleasures still more inconsistent with his monastic vows. Yet so loose were the ideas of the times respecting the conduct of the clergy, whether secular or regular, that the prior Aymer maintained a fair character in the neighbourhood of his abbey. His free, jovial temper, and the readiness with which he granted absolution from all ordinary delinquencies, rendered him a favourite among the nobility and principal gentry, to several of whom he was allied by birth, being of a distinguished Norman family. The ladies in particular were not disposed to scan too nicely the morals of a man who was a professed admirer of their sex, and who possessed many means of dispelling the ennui, which was too apt to intrude upon the halls and bowers of an ancient feudal castle. The prior mingled in the sports of the field with more than due eagerness, and was allowed to possess the best trained horse, and the fleetest greyhounds in the North Riding, circumstances which strongly recommended him to the youthful gentry. With the old he had another part to play, which, when needed, he could sustain with great decorum. His knowledge of books, however superficial, was sufficient to impress upon the ignorance respect for his supposed learning. Ignorance respect. Shouldn't it be ignorant? Look at me. Policing the grammar of a classic novel. I can do that though. And the gravity of his deportment and language, with the high tone which he exerted in setting forth the authority of the Church and of the priesthood, impressed them no less with an opinion of his sanctity. Even the common people, the severest cities of the conduct of their betters, had commiseration with the follies of Prior Aymer. Commiseration? I hope that's the right pronunciation. He was generous, and charity, as it is well known, covered a multitude of sins, in another sense than that in which it is said to do so in Scripture. The revenues of monastery, of which a large part was at his disposal, while they gave him the means of supplying his own very considerable expenses, afforded also those largesses which he bestowed among the peasantry, and with which he frequently relieved the distresses of the oppressed. If Prior Aymer rode hard in the chase, or remained long at banquet, if Prior Aymer was seen at early peep of dawn to enter the postern of the abbey, as he glided home from some rendezvous which had occupied the hours of darkness, men only shrugged up their shoulders and reconciled themselves to his irregularities by recollecting that the same were practised by many of his brethren who had no redeeming qualities whatsoever to atone for them. Prior Aymer, therefore, and his character were well known to our Saxon serfs, who made their rude obeisance and received his benedicite mes filth in return. Is this Latin? Because if it is Latin, I should just read it. But if it is French, no. I'm just going to read it in what English, let's say. Benedicite mes filth. It's not. Let me check. 35. Blessings on you, sons. God's use of false gestures towards the spelling conventions of Old French. Oh, I heard somewhere that Old French was very similar to, I guess, Latin or Italian. Like, they said the word that was written there. Okay, we're gonna forget that. No, we're not gonna forget that. We're gonna move past it. But the singular appearance of his companion and his attendants arrested their attention and excited their wonder, and they could scarcely attend to the prior of Jorvoc's question, when he demanded if they knew of any place of harbourage in the vicinity. So much were they surprised at the half-monastic, half-military appearance of the swarthy stranger, and at the uncouth dress and arms of his eastern attendants. It is probable, too, that the language in which the benediction was conferred and the information asked sounded ungracious, though not probably unintelligible, in the ears of the Saxon peasants. I asked you, my children, said the prior, raising his voice and using the lingua franca, or mixed language, in which the Norman and Saxon races conversed with each other, if there be in this neighbourhood any good men who, for the love of God and devotion to Mother Church, will give 2 of her humblest servants with their train a night's hospitality and refreshment. This he spoke with a tone of conscious importance, which formed a strong contrast to the modest terms which he thought it proper to employ. Thou art right, said Gert. It were ill that Aymer saw the Lady Rowena, and it were worse, it may be, for Cedric to quarrel, as is most likely he would, with his military monk. But, like good servants, let us hear and see and say nothing. We returned to writers, who had soon left the bondsmen far behind them, who maintained the following conversation in Norman French language. usually employed by the superior classes with the exception of the few who were still inclined to boast his Saxon descent. "What mean these fellows by their capricious insolence?" said the Templar to the Benedictine. English. "And why did you prevent me from chastising it?" "Marry, brother Brian," said the prior, touching the one of them, "it were hard for me to render a reason for a fool speaking according to his folly, and the other churl is of that savage, fierce, intractable race, some of whom, as I have often told you, are still to be found amongst the descendants of the conquered Saxons, and whose supreme pleasure it is to testify by all means of their power, their aversions to their conquerors." "Obviously? "I would soon have to beat him into courtesy," observed Brian. "I am accustomed to deal with such spirits. Our Turkish captives are as fierce and intractable as Odin himself could have been. Yet 2 months in my household under the management of my master of the slaves had made them humble, submissive, serviceable, and observant of your will. Marry, sir, you must be aware of the poison and the dagger, for they use either with free will when you give them the slightest opportunity." "Obviously, darling." "Aye, but," answered Prior Aimer. "Every land has its own manners and fashions, and besides that beating this fellow could procure us no information respecting the road to Cedric's house. It would have been sure to have established a quarrel betwixt you and him, had we found a way thither." Thither, such a good word. "Remember what I told you. This wealthy Franklin is proud, fierce, jealous, and irritable, a withstander of the nobility and even of his neighbours, Reginald Front-de-Bœuf and Philip Molvoisin, who are no babies to strive with. He stands up sternly for the privileges of his race, and is proud of his uninterrupted descent from Hereward, a renowned champion of the heptarchy, that he is universally called Cedric the Saxon, and makes a boast of his belongings to a people from whom many others endeavour to hide their descent, lest they should encounter a share of the way victors or severities imposed upon the vanquished." "Prior Aimer," said the Templar, "you are a man of gallantry, learned in the study of beauty, and as expert as troubadour in all matters concerning the arrests of love. But I shall expect much beauty in this celebrated Rowena to counterbalance the self-denial and forbearance which I must exert if I am to court the favour of such a seditious churl as you have described her father Cedric." What are they going to do? "Cedric is not her father," said the prior, "and is but of remote relation. She is descended from higher blood than even he pretends to, and is but distantly connected with him by birth. Her guardian, however, he is, self-constituted as I believe, but his ward is as dear to him as if she were his own child. Of her beauty you shall soon be judge, and of purity of her complexion and the majestic yet soft expression of a mild blue eye. Do not chase from your memory the black-dressed girls of Palestine, aye, or the Horus of old Mahon's paradise. I am an infidel, and no true son of the church." This is not something that you swear upon God. Feels a little weird. Alright. "Should your boasted beauty," said the Templar, "be weighed in the balance and found wanting, you know our wager?" "My gold collar," answered the prior, "against 10 butts of Chian wine. They are mine as securely as if they were already in convent vaults, under the key of old Dennis the cellarer. "And I am myself to be judge," said the Templar, "and am only to be convicted on my own admission that I have seen no maiden so beautiful since Pentecost was 12 months. Ran it not so?" "Prior, your collar is in danger. I will wear it over my portrait in the lists of Ashby Taylor Zosh." Win it fairly, said the prior, and wear it as you will. I will trust you giving true response on your word as a knight and as a churchman. Yet, brother, take my advice and file your tongue to a little more courtesy than your habits of predominating over infidel captives and eastern bondsmen have accustomed you. Cedric the Saxon, if offended, and he is no way slack in taking offence, is a man who, without respect to your knighthood, my high office, or the sanctity of either, would clear his house of us, and send us to lodge with the larks, though the hour were midnight. And be careful how you look on Rowena, whom he cherishes with the most jealous care. As he take the least alarm in that quarter, we are but lost men. It is said he banished his only son from his family for lifting his eyes in the way of affection towards this beauty, who may be worshipped, it seems, at a distance, but not to be approached with other thoughts than such as we bring to the shrine of the Blessed Virgin. Good for you. Well, you have said enough, answered the Templar. I will for a night put on the needful restraint, and deport me as meekly as a maiden. But as for the fear of his expelling us by violence, myself and squires, with Hamid and Abdallah, will warrant you against that disgrace. Doubt not that we shall be strong enough to make good our quarters. We must not let it come so far, answered the prior. But here is the clown's sunken cross, and the night is so dark that we can hardly see which of the roads we are to follow. He bid us turn, I think, to the left. To the right, said the prior, to my best of remembrance. To the left, certainly, the left. I remember his pointing with his wooden sword. Aye, but he held his sword in his left hand, so pointed across his body with it, said the Templar. Each maintained his opinion with sufficient obstinacy, as is usual in all such cases. The attendants were appealed to, but they had not been near enough to hear Wamba's directions. At length Brian remarked what he had first escaped in him in the twilight. Here is someone either asleep or lying dead at the foot of this cross. Hugo, stir him with the butt end of thy lance. This was no sooner done than the figure arose, exclaiming in good French, Whosoever thou art, it is discourteous in you to disturb my thoughts. We did but wish to ask you, said the prior, the road to Rotherwood, the abode of Cedric the Saxon. I myself am bound thither, replied the stranger, and if I had a horse I would be your guide, for the way is somewhat intricate, though perfectly well known to me. Thou shalt have but thanks and reward, my friend, said the prior, if thou wilt bring us to Cedric's in safety. And he caused one of his attendants to mount his own led horse, and give that upon which he had hitherto ridden to the stranger, who was to serve for a guide. Their conductor pursued an opposite road from that which Wamba had recommended, for the purpose of misleading them. The path soon led deeper into the woodland, and crossed more than one brook, the approach to which was rendered perilous by the marshes through which it flowed, but the stranger seemed to know, as if by instinct, the soundest ground and the safest points of the passage, and by dint of caution and attention, brought the party safely into a wilder avenue than any they had yet seen. Pointing to the large, low, irregular building at the upper extremity, he said to the prior, Yonder is Rotherwood, the dwelling of Cedric the Saxon. This was joyful intimation to Aymer, whose nerves were none of the strongest, who had suffered such agitation and alarm in the course of passing through the dangerous bogs that he had not yet had the courtesy to ask his guide a single question. Finding himself now at ease and near shelter, his curiosity began to awake, and he demanded of the guide who and what he was. A farmer, just returned from the Holy Land, was the answer. You had better have tarried there to fight for recovery of the Holy Sepulchre, said the Templar. True, reverend Sir Knight, answered the farmer, to whom the appearance of the Templar seemed perfectly familiar. But when those are under oath to recover the holy city are found travelling at such distance from the scene of their duties, can you wonder that a peaceful peasant like me should decline the task which they have abandoned? The Templar would have made an angry reply, but was interrupted by the prior, who again expressed its astonishment that their guide, after such long absence, should be perfectly acquainted with the passes of the forest. I was born a native of these parts, answered the guide, As he made the reply, they stood before the mansion of Cedric, a low, irregular building containing several courtyards or enclosures extending over considerable space of ground, and which, though its size argued the inhabitants to be a person of wealth, differed entirely from the tall, turreted, and castellated buildings in which the Norman nobility resided, and which had become the universal style of architecture throughout England. Rotherwood was not, however, without defences. No habitation in that disturbed period could have been so, without the risk of being plundered and burnt before the next morning. A deep fosse or ditch was drawn around the whole building, filled with water from neighbouring stream. A double stockade, a palisade composed of the pointed beams which the adjacent forest supplied, defended the outer and inner bank of the trench. There was an entrance from the west through the outer stockade, which communicated by a drawbridge with a similar opening in the interior defences. Some precautions had been taken to place those entrances under the protection of projecting angles, by which they might be flanked in case of need by archers or singlers. Before this entrance the Templar wound his horn loudly, for the rain, which had long threatened, began now to descend with great violence. Chapter 3. We will be back in an hour.